After I pull the screws out, I check their lengths, and you can see that they're all the same, so there's really no need for using this template. But it's good practice anyway, because if you're doing a job for the first time, there's really no way to tell whether or not the screws are going to be the same or different. As you can see, what I've done here, because I'm going to start scraping this gasket, I wrapped a little bit of aluminum foil over the basket and placed lint-free towels around the basket so that no debris actually will go into the case. Just wanted to talk about removing gaskets like this, and it can be a tricky job because this material is aluminum and it's very soft. So it's very easy to gouge it up and then have leaks. I use several different types of scrapers. The first scraper I usually start with is a plastic one, and I try to get as much of the gasket off as I can. As you can see, a lot of this gasket has come off, but some areas are still in place. They're really stuck to the case pretty good. But you can tell that there are kind of two different situations going on here. Here, you can see that this gasket has kind of torn, and the top layer, which is relatively smooth, has come off. And in this particular case, the top layer is still attached. And I treat these two situations differently because, I'm going to analogize this situation to plowing snow and this situation to maybe scraping ice off pavement, right? And so, if you're plowing snow, you can use essentially kind of almost a square plow. And so I have two scrapers that I routinely use. One is this scraper from Motion Pro. It's got different blades, but the one I prefer is this brass blade. And it's a sharp blade. You can see it has a very sharp edge. Another scraper I use is the Super Scraper. It's made or distributed at least by Goodson. And you can see that it has a square edge, very hard, if you want to call it a blade. It's made of carbide. So these are very, philosophically speaking, in terms of approach, very different approaches. This uses a very soft material and a sharp edge, and this uses, the edges are still sharp, it's just a square, right? But this material is very hard. So one thing you have to keep in mind when using a scraper like this, really mind where these corners go, because these corners can do a lot of damage. And when I scrape, ideally, you would like this surface to be as wide as possible, so you can kind of scrape along the surface like this at a minimal angle, so basically like a snowplow, moving like this. You really don't want to do this. And this scraper you can actually use in two modes. One mode is more like a snowplow, like so, and another mode is kind of if you need to scrape some ice of concrete, right, you would be doing it like so. And so that's exactly what's happening in this particular case. Here, if I were to use this scraper, I would be using it more like a snowplow. And in this particular case, it's kind of a two-step process. We always want to get to this stage before scraping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to remove this gasket and just kind of cut it, just cut the gasket itself without digging into the metal, and then use this again as a snowplow like so, or this scraper like so, to get this type of deposit off. When you're working with this, it's also helpful to soften the material, and I use adhesive remover, and this is 3M, very good stuff. And what I do is I just soak the gasket, and you can see it actually changes color. Gets a little darker because it's receiving this liquid, and it softens the gasket so that now as I scrape it, there's mechanical and chemical action going on at once. So you can see how easily that material has been removed. Now if I were to use this scraper here, it's the same thing. I'm trying to keep it as level as I can, and I'm exerting very little force on it. And you can see it's removed some gasket material. I'm going to reapply the adhesive remover here again. So you get the idea. All the stuff is coming off. I'm going to try to use this again. And this is, again, a snow plow type of motion where this thing is more perpendicular than less to the surface. And there's some angle here. I really do like this scraper. And again, just to reiterate, you have to be very careful. I would not ever scrape, even though it seems like this positioning of the scraper would make it more level. There's good danger of these corners digging in, so I try not to ever use it this way, always keeping the corners off the surface. In this particular case, what we need to do to get it to this point is we need to scrape off the top layer of quote-unquote ice, because this is kind of smooth and hard. And the way I'm going to do that is, rather than using it as a snow plow, more like a chisel. And I'm trying to dig into the gasket, of course not the case. So you can see that worked pretty well. Again, I'm trying to cut into the gasket. So the problem, if you don't get this top layer off, using the adhesive remover is not going to help much because it doesn't like to penetrate. So that's essentially how I get the gasket off. Another thing I wanted to mention is this. When I pulled off the gasket, I saw silicone. And at first I wasn't sure where that came from. And then after looking a little closer, it made sense. As they were sealing these case halves, they actually used silicone between the cases, and some of it bled out and got onto the gasket. As you can imagine, some of the stuff separates and falls off and goes into your engine. It can plug an oil passage, and that could be bad news. It might be a good idea to go in once everything is pulled out of here and all the plates are out, kind of chase these joints, and you can see there's silicone right here. I don't know if the camera is going to pick it up. You see that right there. So I don't know what's happening farther in yet, but all of this really needs to be removed. I wouldn't want to, if there's, see that? I just tore that off. So I'm going to try to remove as much of it as I can. I'm sure there's stuff hanging on to the walls and whatever, and can just fall into the engine at some point. And I really don't want that to happen. So once all the plates are out, I'm going to inspect it and see if I can clean things up.